This one is called The Delivery Driver. I live alone in a small apartment. I work from home, so I don't get out much. Most of my interactions with the outside world are through deliveries, groceries, takeout, packages. It's convenient, but it also means I rely on strangers coming to my door. There's this one delivery driver, though, who started to make me feel uneasy. He's always the same guy, older with a thin, almost gaunt face, and eyes that seem to linger a little too long. He never says much, just a curt "delivery for George," and then he's gone. It started with small things. He'd occasionally make a comment about something he saw through my window, like, "Nice view of the park," or "You have a lot of plants." Harmless enough. But it felt intrusive. Then he started showing up at odd hours. And not just during the usual delivery windows, but late at night, or even early in the morning. He'd claim it was a rescheduled delivery or a system error, but it always seemed to coincide with when I was alone. One time, he brought a package that I hadn't ordered. I told him there must have been a mistake, but he insisted it was for me, that I had my name and address on it. I reluctantly took it, and when I opened it, it was just a small, unmarked box. Nothing inside. That night, I started noticing things. Small things. Like a light flickering that I hadn't noticed before, or a faint scratching sound coming from the hallway. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I started checking my security cameras more frequently. I noticed that the delivery driver would sometimes pause outside my door, just standing there for a few seconds before ringing the bell. He'd also linger in the hallway after leaving, looking around, like he was trying to see something inside. One evening, I was watching TV when I heard a knock at the door. I looked at the security camera, and it was him. He was holding a small paper bag. I didn't answer. He knocked again, harder this time. I could hear him muttering something under his breath. I still didn't answer. After a few minutes, he finally left, but I could still see him on the camera, walking slowly down the hallway, looking back at my door. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking the security cameras, watching for any sign of him. I even put a chair against the door, just in case. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in a messy, almost childlike scrawl. It said, "I know you're in there." That's when I called the police. They took my statement, but they said there wasn't much they could do without any evidence of a crime. I've changed my delivery address to a P.O. box. I've installed extra locks on my door. But I still can't shake the feeling that he's watching me, that he knows where I am, and that someday he'll be back. This one is called Footsteps in the Attic of a Home That I Once Lived In. When I was 12, my parents came home to tell my older sister and I that they had bought a new house and took us over to see it. It was a 2,164 square feet single-level home situated right off the fairway of a golf course with lots of living space. 4 bedrooms and 2.5 baths. From the outside of the house, it looked totally normal, but on the inside, anything but. The living room and dining room were entirely baby blue. Carpet, walls, mantel, curtains, and even the large white granite fireplace had baby blue paint on it. The family rooms had the largest floral print that I've ever seen in my life, with matching curtains. We're talking blooms, 2 feet wide. Every room had an outlandishly done theme. I thought my parents were crazy, but when we got to the bedrooms, I started to cry, refusing to live there as every single bedroom door had a double-keyed deadbolt on it. the kind that can only be opened or locked with a key from either side of the door. I argued that the person that had been living there before was crazy. My parents assured me that it was just a woman who'd won the house in a divorce and let the house fall into foreclosure. Because it was so cheap for its size, only $118,000, they promised that they would renovate the entire place and replace all of those creepy bedroom doors. Took months for the house to be fully renovated, and as promised, it was a normal home again. Though there was some tiny flecks of baby blue paint left on the rough granite fireplace. Thinking back, I can understand why my parents looked past its eccentricity, as it was a very nice house with a good floor plan. I'm still in agreement with 13-year-old me when we finally moved, in that those deadbolts were a bad sign that my parents should have heeded. My parents ended up splitting up a few months later, so it was just my mom, sister, and myself living there. And me? I thought the house was haunted. At night, I would hear footsteps starting at the back end of the hall where my mom's bedroom was, and make their way down to my room at the front of the house. The first time I heard them, I turned my light on and stared at the ceiling, noting that there was a tiny hole in it just over my bed. I started staying awake at night, reading until I heard the footsteps start, and then glare up at the tiny hole, pondering whether it was even big enough for someone to peer down into the room back at me. Out of curiosity, I checked the other rooms, and sure enough, they all had holes in the ceiling too. Because things were so turbulent there with my parents' divorce, I never said anything about it. The three of us were fighting all the time anyways, as our belongings kept mysteriously ending up in each other's rooms. I'd find things of my mom's or sister's in my room and be accused of stealing them when I had no idea how they ended up in there. Same things would happen with my things, so that definitely added to the turbulence in the home. Though I did try pointing out that there was something wrong with the house. My mom just got mad. Worse yet, one night during dinner, my mom found pins in her mashed potatoes just as she was about to take a bite. She accused my sister and I of trying to kill her, but I honestly don't know how the pins got in there. Hole in the ceiling maybe? I don't know. Things got a lot more turbulent after that. One day after 3 years of living there, I came home from school and sat down in the breakfast nook to do my homework as usual. I'd barely started working on it when I noticed that the room smelled very strongly of Old Spice, a cologne my dad never used, and it had literally been 3 years since a man stepped foot in the house. In fear, I grabbed my homework, went straight out the nearby sliding glass door, and did my homework on the porch of the backyard, confident that golfers would be passing by as I worked. My sister came home about an hour later, and I rushed back into the house to tell her what I had experienced. We stood in the breakfast nook for a few minutes, sniffing the air, and nothing was there. She dismissed it as my imagination, but I didn't imagine it. Another odd scent thing was that occasionally there would be the smell like something died in the kitchen on warm days. My mom would joke rather darkly that it was probably the prior owner, and explained that she had disappeared a few months after her divorce had finalized. I knew that last part wasn't a joke, as we had been receiving her mail for years, writing "no longer at this address" and sticking it back in the mailbox. Sometimes I wondered if my mom was only half joking and really thought the prior owner was under the house, and other times I wonder if the smell was something else entirely. Once my sister moved out to go to college, it was just my mom and I. Eventually, she decided the house was too big for the two of us, and we moved into a smaller home after living in this house for 5 years. So, to recap, missing prior owner, deadbolts on the bedroom doors, footsteps walking above all the bedrooms at night, tiny holes in the ceiling, missing or mysteriously misplaced items, the smell of men's cologne, the occasional smell of rot. Teen me thought the house was haunted, and that's what I said when I confided the story about the house to my friends and boyfriends. That's what footsteps are in the attic, right? It was about 4 years after we'd moved out of that house that the three of us went out to dinner along with my sister and my boyfriends. We were in the middle of dinner when my boyfriend at the time, trying to make conversation, said that I had told him about how we'd all lived in a haunted house. I was super embarrassed. My mom and sister were puzzled, and I had explained that I heard footsteps at night. My sister, shocked, said that she heard them too, walking up and down the length of the bedrooms. As we were talking about the missing things and confirming that we'd not really stolen anything, and that afternoon that I'd smelled cologne, we realized that our mom was frozen and white as a sheet. We asked her what was wrong, and she explained. Apparently, when the contractor was renovating the house, he'd gone up into the attic to check things out there and found an old mattress, empty wine bottles, some holding candles, and a bunch of trash up there, as if someone had been living in the attic. My mom said they cleared it out and decided not to tell either my sister or I because we were already dead set against the house. Did someone make their way back up there after the renovation was done? Were they the footsteps at night? Were they coming down into the house while we were all away with work and school and moving things around, causing trouble? Was that why I smelled cologne so strongly that one day? Were they actually in the house still? Did they drop pins through a ceiling hole into my mom's food as that scared us all? Was the rotting smell the prior owner under the house? Or was it the smell of their waste in the attic? Were they the prior owner? We'll never know because we didn't talk about it as we were too busy fighting and not talking about what we were hearing at night. This one is called The Time I Heard Shrieking in the Woods. When I was 17, my parents were in the process of building their first greenhouse. It wasn't very big, but it was functional. We used it to grow plants like snapdragon, basil, tomatoes, strawberries, and so much more. They had also recently, at the time, added a few fruit trees, mostly peaches and apples, but there were 2 other fruit trees that hadn't been planted yet in the outside earth. They were infamous for dying off randomly, tangerine and lemon if anyone is wondering, so we were keeping them in the greenhouse to hopefully stabilize. One shelf of the greenhouse contained the plants that my teenage self was obsessed with and subsequently cared for. 4 potted dusty millers, 3 potted purple-white pansies, and a mimicry plant that looked like a horseshoe. Next to the greenhouse was a little fenced patch of dirt that my mom planned to use for crops once they began sprouting. For some context, I've lived south of the Appalachian Mountains my whole life, close enough that I'm scared to leave my house at night, but far enough that I've never personally heard anything before this incident. I always take my dogs with me when I venture outside. This one is important. One of my big dogs, War, always wears a GPS tracking collar because he can and will disappear for hours, and it's terrifying to think we might never see him again. Very important. This kind of collar has an electric field that warns him against leaving the yard. Now, to get into the meat of the story, it was about 6 in the afternoon on an early spring day, so the sun was relatively low in the sky. I was inside the greenhouse, watering my shelf of plants. My dogs were much closer to the house than me, so I was basically in the woods alone. The greenhouse is barely 10 feet from the tree line. As I'm caring for the plants, I hear cracking in the woods. I freeze, knowing there was no one else around me. Then it starts. Horrible sounds coming from the woods. It sounded like a horse trying to mimic a child's screams of joy, but it was wrong. Too high-pitched, too scratchy, and it kept looping in this strange way. The sounds made the hair on my arm stand straight up, but overall it was far too close for my superstitious teenage self. I knew the rules by heart. I finished watering the plant I was looking at, pretended to check the others and deemed them fine, then began quietly putting things back where they belonged. The greenhouse was covered in fogged-up plastic, so anything out there would have been nothing but my shadow. I carefully left the greenhouse, locking the door behind me. I wasted no time in climbing the hill towards the house, not looking back. My dog, War, noticed me and started walking towards me. Out of nowhere, he began sprinting and snarling. It was the first and only time I had feared my dog. He's always been a giant baby, but that one day I felt nothing but instinctual terror. Before I could react, he was gone. He had disappeared into the woods, and he vanished for 6 days. I honestly thought that whatever I heard had done him in. He eventually showed back up, and now he has a nasty scar through his left eye. The vet told us it wouldn't interfere with his sight, but it was very noticeable. To this day, he stays close enough to touch me when I get near the greenhouses. There was only one other time he ever reacted, though. When I looked, I could have sworn I saw a goat staring at me. Funny, considering there is not a single goat in my very sparse neighborhood. This one is called The Man in the Autumn Forest. It was a cold autumn evening, and like every day after school, I was biking home from my grandparents' house. The route was familiar, a 30-minute ride mostly along a well-lit main road. But on the final stretch, I always took a shortcut, a narrow forest path that led straight to my house and saved me 5 minutes. My grandparents often warned me, stick to the main road, but I never listened. That evening, the darkness felt heavier than usual, and the chill in the air made my breath visible. Frost had made the ground slippery, but I was too tired to care. I turned onto the forest path. A lone street light at the entrance cast a dim glow, but the rest of the trail was shrouded in near total darkness. Halfway down the path, I noticed movement ahead. A figure stepped onto the trail from the opposite side. It was tall, taller than me, even on my bike, and wore a hood that obscured its face. My heart began to race, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just someone else taking the shortcut. As we approached the single streetlight in the middle of the path, I slowed down. The figure stopped, just a few meters away from me. Slowly, it lifted its head, and the light fell on its face. My throat tightened. The person's mouth was grotesquely slit from ear to ear, as if someone had mutilated it with a knife. For a moment we stared at each other, and then it began walking toward me. Panic gripped me. I pedaled as fast as I could. The path was slippery. The bike wobbled beneath me, and I could hear its footsteps behind me. They grew louder. It was running. My legs burned and my heart pounded in my chest. The streetlight at the end of the path finally came into view, but it seemed so much farther away than it should have been. My tires skidded on the frozen ground, but I couldn't stop. I knew that if I fell, it would catch me. At last, I reached my house. I jumped off my bike, slammed the garage gate shut, gasping for air. My hands were trembling, and my breathing was erratic, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. From the house, I couldn't see the forest path, only the final stretch that led to our street. I waited for what felt like hours, but was likely just minutes. Nothing happened. I wanted to take a peek at the street, but I couldn't bring myself to. What if it was there? What if it was just waiting for me? Finally, I dragged myself inside, leaving my bike where it was. When I told my family about the man, no one believed me. They laughed, saying it was just my imagination playing tricks on me in the dark. But that night, I lay awake for hours. It was real, and to this day, I wonder if that man is still out there. Since that night, I've never taken the forest path again. Yet, every time I pass the intersection leading to it, I feel uneasy, like something is off. I can't explain it, but I know I'll never go back. This one is called I Saw Hat Man. Hello. I am writing this while crying because it hadn't been on my mind for a long time. While browsing on YouTube, I came across a channel that told horror stories, and the title said, "Did you see this man in the hat?" I am 30 years old. I think I was 13 or 14 when I saw this man. It is a memory I can never forget. When I saw that title, I was shocked, wondering if anyone else had seen it because the description is exactly the same. I am writing while shaking. I grew up in a big family. In fact, at that age, I was sleeping next to my grandfather. Then, this man in the hat came. He was wearing old clothes, like a cowboy hat, exactly as in the description. Neither his face nor his body are visible, only black. He was waiting for my grandfather and me. It was not a dream. I am serious. It was not a dream. Because I never woke up. I did not wake up after seeing him. However, when I called my grandfather, he didn't wake up. He just told me to sleep and hugged me. But the man was very hurt. He just looked at me. And 2 more people came to him. They didn't have hats either, and they said, "Let's go," and took that man away. I'm serious right now. If anyone sees this, please enlighten me. I experienced it a long time ago. Who is the Hat Man? This one is called I Heard My Friend's Deceased Husband. I was pet sitting for my next door neighbor, Angel, while she was in Hawaii. She's a widow, and I was just taking care of her 2 cats and elderly Yorkie. All I had to do was feed them, play with them, and clean the litter box, etc. Pretty simple stuff. Then, while she was still gone, her dog passed away. I called her, did what needed to be done, and put him in the freezer like she asked. That night, after everything settled, I went out to the back patio for a smoke. Around midnight, I started packing up my stuff, turning out the lights, and getting ready to head home. And then, I heard it. A bark. But not from a dog. It was a man's voice, like someone was imitating a dog. I stopped, turned around, and looked. My house is to the left of Angel's. There's a vacant house to the right, and behind her place is another house with motion sensor lights. No one was there. Then I heard it again. Once, and then twice. It sounded like someone was standing there just on the other side of the fence, messing with me. The barking got louder, more frequent, like whoever was doing it was just having way too much fun scaring me. And the weirdest part? It didn't feel like a person. I don't know how to explain it, but something about it was just wrong. That was all I needed to nope the hell out of there, so I ran. The barking got louder as I booked it, but the second I reached the front yard, silence. I didn't stop until I was inside my house. My husband calmed me down, listened to the whole thing, and said it was probably just some idiot playing a prank. I wanted to believe him, but I was still freaked out. Fast forward a few days, I was outside smoking with my mother-in-law, and I randomly brought it up, told her the whole story. She barely reacted, just nodded and said, "Oh, that's just Rex." I was like, sorry, what? She explained that Angel's late husband, Rex, used to bark at her from over the fence as a joke. The next day, I told Angel, and she confirmed. Yup, that was definitely something Rex used to do. I still won't go back there alone at night. This one is called The Corner That Gave Me Nightmares. As a kid, when I was 4 or 5, I had my own room in the relatively big flat of my parents. The room basically had an upside-down L shape. Just imagine the Tetris block. At the time, I slept in the very top right of the room, which Kid May decided was getting annoying due to me not being able to see around the corner, but still out of the window, which, as cliché as it sounds, led to the back of a cemetery? At least I believe it is one. Which never really terrified me though. What did bother me though was not being able to see around the corner of the room. I usually saw weird things just lurking around the corner, which I believed to be typical night fears usual for kids at the time. I decided to move my bed so I could look down both of the ways as to know there were no monsters. In the following 4 nights, I had horrible nightmares, only one of which I can remember vividly. So on the next night, I decided that I would move the bed back to its original place. While the imaginary monsters now were there again, the nightmares weren't, and I slept very good there till we moved. To note, I wasn't a really scared kid, and not really loud in the night compared to other kids, and even babies, according to my parents at least. Which makes it weird that my parents told me that I had screamed in the last night I stayed in that corner that viewed both ways, and cried heavily. I know this might not have anything really to do with the paranormal, maybe more with the evolving human mind, but it is definitely one of the only few memories I have of when I was young. This one is called Stalker at a Workplace. I am a female who is 22 years old when this happened. I worked in a grocery store which had been featured in the news. You could see me in the clip and it was clear where I worked. I just came back from vacation and a coworker told me that some guy had been coming around every day for a week asking for me. When I asked who or why, they told me they had no idea, but he was around my age and seemed a little off. A few years passed by and my coworker came and told me that the guy was back and again asking for me. Let's call him James. I can't remember his name anyways. In the back room, we had a computer and you could see all the camera footage from all over the store. I looked and didn't recognize who James was, but decided to go ask what he wanted. He was clearly drunk and said that he had seen me on TV and wanted to ask me out. I replied with, "I'm sorry, but I'm in a relationship," even though I was single. I said I needed to get back to work and he asked me if he should come with me. I was confused and said that I am working. He then left, but I could see him through the cameras outside the store, drinking. A few hours passed by and he was still waiting for me outside, so I had to use another exit when I left. The next day I came to work and saw him waiting for me outside the store. He had a huge smile on his face and walked up to me. He was really shy and didn't say a word until I said hey while passing by to get into the store. He followed me inside and said he needed to talk. I asked him what's up, and he said, "How about we go to the movies?" He was really creepy and I replied, "I'm sorry, I have a boyfriend, remember?" As I was walking away, he started following me and asked me if he should come help me with my work. "No thanks," I replied. Once again, I looked at the camera footage and yet again, he was waiting for me outside. At this point, I started asking a female coworker to escort me safely to the tram every night when my shift ended. I started getting really scared once this had been going on for a while, and he clearly wouldn't leave me alone. I asked my brother if he could drive me to work on his motorcycle and hug me outside my workplace, so it looked like he was my boyfriend and James would maybe leave me alone, since I knew he was somewhere watching and waiting for me to get back to work. It didn't help. I started getting messages like, "Is that your boyfriend?" and "He doesn't need to know if you go out." I was confused, of how he had gotten my number. I asked all my coworkers and a new one said she'd given my number because he had said he's a friend of mine. I was pissed. At this point, I asked my male coworkers to throw him out if he ever came back, which was a lot. A couple of weeks went by without any harassment, and I finally thought he had left me alone. Boy, was I wrong. I came to work one day and was in the changing room and heard that we have a new coworker, and it's his first day. I didn't think anything of it and proceeded to change my clothes. Once I got out of the changing room, my jaw dropped. Another coworker said, "Hey, this is James." I looked in horror as she asked me what's wrong. I said, "I know. This is the creep that has been stalking me for weeks." As James smiled, I went and searched for my boss to ask him what the fuck. My boss said he had no idea that this was my stalker and kind of laughed it off as no big deal. I told him either he leaves or I will. He said that I wouldn't have to work the same shift as James and he couldn't fire him. He lied. I had a lot of shifts with him, and wherever I went, he followed without saying a word. He just kept following me. I would often have my lunch break by the computer so I could see where he was, and every day I could see him just staring at me behind me as I ate. We had cameras there also. This went on for a while. He would text me every day, but at work he didn't say anything, just stare. My boss finally understood what a freak James was and that he didn't do any work, just stalking. He started to think of ideas of how to fire him. One time I noticed James was clearly drunk at work and told my boss. He got fired, and this is when the stalking finally stopped. This one is called "Man Stalking Me on Reddit Starts Stalking Me in Real Life." A few months ago, I made a very unremarkable post on r/symbology, asking about the meaning of a symbol on a necklace I found. While it seemed like most of the people didn't know what it meant, someone called Stan, who asked to DM me. Either Reddit or the mods of Symbology hid the comment from the post, because it was really hard for me to find. But he had a simple username, so I searched it and found him. This seems really stupid looking back on it, but I didn't find anything suspicious about him at first, and I just wanted anything resembling an answer as to what the symbol on the necklace was. He told me a bizarre story about how the necklace was an elder sign, and there were only 5 of them made, but one of the 5 owners passed away. It sounded like he was just making it up, but I indulged him and asked him about his crazy story, though I didn't think much of it. I made another post a month later to RBI, asking about a set of missing persons cases I remembered from when I was younger, asking if anyone knew about it. It was completely unrelated to anything I've posted before, but Stan sent me a message about it, saying I should delete the post because it was just about an ongoing investigation. He said I should delete the post about the necklace too. All of this seemed super shady to me, since this just happened to be someone who responded to a previous post of mine. I asked him to send me some kind of proof that he was actually someone with authority on this, but he just kept urging me to delete the post, getting more and more aggressive. I ignored him, thinking he just wanted attention, and went on about my life. I'm a cashier at a convenience store, and a few weeks after I stopped messaging Stan, 2 men were buying 2 frozen pizzas. They both looked early to mid-20s, one with blonde hair and one with black hair. I didn't think anything suspicious of this at first, until the black-haired one said, "So, Livian, did anyone else ever tell you what the necklace meant?" I was absolutely stunned. My real name is not Livian. It's been my username on everything since I was a kid, but no one has ever used that name for me in real life. Though I realized one of them must have been Stan, I just pretended to not know what he was talking about. And he said, "Never mind," and paid for his pizzas, and the 2 of them left. I was concerned, because I'm not sure exactly how he found me. As I was walking home, I saw the two of them in a car, driving on the road next to me, and both of them just gave me a brief death stare. I didn't know which one of them was Stan until I saw one of them again. I assumed it was the blonde one, since he was the one who talked to me, but I actually never saw him again. I saw the black-haired one again several times, always standing or walking next to someone, but it was a different person every time. In all of these sightings, Stan never talked to me. He'd just make the same death stare at me, usually talking to whoever he was with. After a while, he walked up to me and talked to me for the first time, asking me if I took down any of the Reddit posts. I feigned ignorance again, but this time he kept pushing. I said, "Dude, leave me alone," and walked away. I hadn't called the police yet because Stan didn't intimidate me that much, and he never seemed hostile. But one day, on the way home from the laundromat, I got a little concerned when I saw the same car behind me for the whole drive home. I got really paranoid when I realized it looked a lot like Stan's car, which I had only seen once. I had 3 left turns, but he seemed to catch on and turned right. When I made it around the block and got back home, Stan was parked right in front of the apartment complex, just standing as he looked directly at me. I rolled up my windows, pulled out my phone, and dialed 911. He walked up to me and started knocking on my window. The police showed up and talked to him. I don't know what exactly he told them, but they didn't really do anything. They asked if I had any proof of him stalking me before. I showed them his comments and direct messages, but they didn't seem interested. He told them he'd go home and not talk to me, and they seemed satisfied. Thankfully, I haven't seen him again, or any of the people I saw him hanging out with. This one is called "Someone Was in My Apartment." For a little bit of context, this happened last year in February when I was 17. I'm a girl and I've always had moments of paranoia when I'm home alone. Not all the time, but sometimes it just hits me hard. So, it was a regular day. I had just finished school and was at my home by myself. Before I get into it, let me describe my hallway so you can picture it. At the beginning of the hallway, on the left, is my bedroom. A little further down, still on the left, is my parents' room. And at the very end is the bathroom, which also has a toilet. The bathroom door is a bit weird. It has a curved window in it, so you can see movement through it, but not very clearly. Anyway, I was in my room when I decided to go to the bathroom. Since I was home alone, I didn't bother closing the door. That's when I heard it. A sound coming from my parents' room. The floor creaking. Someone walking toward me. I immediately locked the door. I only had 10% battery on my phone, and I have 0 survival skills. So instead of calling the police, I FaceTimed a friend. I was scared, but I was also kind of laughing it off, trying not to freak out. Then, I made the mistake of looking through the curved window. I saw a man standing there. I snapped a picture and started screaming, "I'm calling the police! Get out!" At this point, my battery was dying, but I called my dad. He rushed home, but my phone died before he got there. All I could do was sit on the toilet, holding the door, just in case the man tried to push it open. I was terrified. The worst part? I kept imagining that as soon as my dad opened the front door, the man would jump on him or something. I sat there for 45 minutes, just waiting. Then, I heard it again, the floor creaking. Finally, my dad arrived. He told me it was safe to come out, but when I did, there was nothing. No signs of forced entry, no windows open, no trace of anyone ever being there. To this day, I still think about it. Did I imagine everything? Or did something really happen? Just so you know, I'm not into supernatural stuff, but that night still haunts me. This one is called "Sometimes It's Not Pretend." I grew up deep in the backwoods of Washington State, where my parents lived on a 5-acre plot of land. Over half the property was covered by dense woods, stretching far beyond our borders. My brother and I spent our entire childhood there, playing, climbing trees, and catching frogs at the ponds. It was everything two boys could really ask for. One late summer night, I was about 8, and I heard someone screaming far off in the woods. I was the only one who heard it because I had my window open. It shook me to the core. I've heard screams before, but they were from coyotes. This was different. I went to my brother's room and opened his window to see if he could hear it too. Sure enough, he did. Not wanting to worry our parents, we kept it to ourselves. After a week of hearing these screams every night, we decided to tell our parents. They said it was probably just some coyotes, nothing to be afraid of. But the screams kept getting closer, and then strange things started happening. Our outdoor toys went missing. I couldn't find the skateboard I'd left outside one night. My brother's bike disappeared, and our favorite pool inflatables were gone. We told our parents again, but they just brushed it off. The screams were still coyotes, and we probably just lost our stuff because we didn't take care of it. The screams grew louder, and they sounded closer, so I stopped sleeping with my window open. But one night, I heard yelling, and it sounded closer than ever. I peered out the window, and what I saw froze me with terror. Just outside, beyond the backyard, and near the edge of the woods, stood the figure of a man. He was tall, taller than the wooden fence that separated our yard from the trees. Even from the second floor, I could see the moonlight reflecting off the whites of his eyes. They were huge, bulging out of his sockets. His gaze was fixed on the house. He turned, slowly, and his eyes met mine. My heart stopped. He began walking toward the fence, moving with a strange, slow grace. He was coming my way. Panic flooded my chest. I couldn't move. I watched, frozen, as he drew closer. When he was right beneath my window, I could see his face clearly. His mouth was wide open, as if in a perpetual scream, but no sound came out. His eyes were still, unblinking, and his face held an expression of surprise, like he couldn't comprehend how much his eyes bulged. His hair was patchy, some of it pulled out, and his clothes were ragged and dirty. He wasn't wearing shoes. He stood right beneath me, staring up at my window. I don't know how long we stayed there, locked in that silent gaze, but it felt like minutes. Then, without warning, a blood-curdling scream erupted from his open mouth. It was silent, but it filled my entire being with dread. The scream broke me out of my stupor. I ran to my brother's room and we rushed into our parents' room, crying and screaming. But they thought it was just a bad dream, that I scared my brother. No matter how much I begged, they wouldn't believe me. The last week of summer was the worst. The man with the bulging eyes would watch me from the tree line at night. Sometimes I'd spot him during the day, but whenever I called out for help, he'd vanish. When school started, I was relieved to be away from the house. It felt like a stressful time, and I started to see less and less of the man. Maybe it was my imagination, I thought. After all, I was a kid with a wild imagination. But then, one late Tuesday night, there was a knock at the front door. I immediately thought of the screaming man. Could he be knocking? Could he be coming for me? My father opened the door to find a cop standing there. The officer explained that the neighbors had called 911 because someone had been breaking into their pool house. He told my dad that the man had been living in the woods for months, and if anything had gone missing over the summer, it might be found at the camp the intruder had set up. I couldn't resist. I went outside to catch a glimpse of the man. As I peered into the dark cop car, my breath caught. A face slowly pressed against the window, eyes bulging, mouth ajar, and tufts of hair visible. It was him, the screaming man. So, after telling the story, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that kids aren't always just playing pretend. When they say they see a monster, I know I wasn't. This one is called I Saw a Missing Person poster with my face on it. For the past few weeks, I've noticed more and more missing persons flyers around town. At first, I thought little of it. People go missing all the time, especially with the drug issues here. But something happened the other day that made me start paying closer attention to these posters. I was walking down the road, hands full of groceries, when I glanced at a fresh flyer. I froze. My own face was staring back at me, along with my personal details. My heart sank, and I dropped everything I was holding. This couldn't be real. Someone had to be playing a sick joke on me. After gathering my groceries, I noticed the phone number on the flyer. I decided to call it. When I did, all I got was an answering machine. A man named Charles. I left a message, feeling more confused, but carried on with my day. Later, as I was cleaning up, I went to wash off the milk and eggs from my arms. In the shower, I started to talk to myself to process my thoughts. Then, I heard something. Footsteps? Breathing? Something was there, just outside the bathroom. I paused, but the sound faded, so I brushed it off. Maybe it was the pipes or an animal on the roof. After finishing my shower, I was met with a chilling sight. In the bathroom mirror, written in the steam, was something I didn't recognize. It wasn't there earlier. I was sure of it. I snapped a picture of it, unsure of what it was. I didn't write it, but who did? I packed a bag and headed to my mom's house, stopping at the police station to file a report. The officer checked my house, but found nothing unusual. Still, he advised me to stay at my mom's. That night, I woke up to what I thought was a car's headlights flashing. It was a struggle to fall back asleep, as I was haunted by a childhood memory. The coat rack in my mom's house. As a kid, I'd always thought it looked like a man standing there, watching me sleep. Now, as an adult, I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't stop staring at it, even as I lay in bed, frozen. The next day, I was late for work. My boss wasn't mad about me being late, but about a strange phone call he'd received. Apparently, someone called him, sounding like me, saying I wouldn't be in and that I'd quit. I hadn't made that call. When I returned home later to grab more things, I found fiberglass insulation scattered around my closet. The crawl space entrance was wide open, way too open for it to be just a mistake. I snapped a picture of it, but then heard a noise downstairs. My heart raced, and I bolted for the window, grabbing what I could and jumping out. The fall hurt, but it was better than facing whoever was inside. I called the police again, but the deputy said there was no sign of anyone in my house. It looked like no one had been there for days, but I had just left minutes before. That didn't make any sense. When I got to my mom's, I tried to show her the picture of the mirror writing, but my camera was broken. The SD card, however, still worked. As I scrolled through the photos, my blood ran cold. Most of the 500 gigabytes card was filled with pictures of me sleeping, at my house and even at my mom's. Over 200 photos, all taken while I slept, with the camera positioned where the coat rack stood, capturing every moment. Panicked, I called out for my mom, but she wasn't there. Her car was gone. As I turned around, I heard a breath, quick and sharp, behind me. Without looking back, I ran out of the house, caught the first bus I could. It was a long ride, and I had time to collect my thoughts and write it all down. I'm heading to my dad's now. Once I get there, I'll post more of the photos. This was the end of a note found on the laptop of a missing person. His laptop, backpack, and shoes were left on a bus, where the driver found them upon arriving at the last stop. If anyone has any information about the disappearance of Redacted, please contact your local police or the Department of Internal Defenses in your county. This one is called There Was a Man Hiding in Our Closet. I was around 16, almost turning 17, living with my mom and my little brother, Ryan, who was around 7 at the time. My mom worked night shifts at a nursing home, so I was usually the one looking after Ryan when she was gone. Since he was younger, he'd be fast asleep by 8 p.m., and I'd settle in for a quiet night, watch TV, scroll on my phone, eat junk food, typical teenager stuff. We lived in a small, one-story house on the edge of some woods. It wasn't totally isolated, but there weren't many neighbors either. Most nights, I loved the peace and quiet of having the house all to myself. That is, until everything started to change. The first time I noticed something weird, it was subtle. I was in bed, around 11 p.m., scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet slowly across the carpet. I froze. Ryan was asleep in his room. My mom wasn't home yet. The house was eerily still. My heart hammered in my chest. I sat up, straining my ears, holding my breath. For a moment, nothing. Then, I heard it again. A soft, scuffing, closer now, as if someone was moving through the living room, creeping through the darkness. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling, and tiptoed into the hall. My heart pounded in my ears as I checked the front door. Locked. The windows, locked. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. The hall closet door. It was cracked open, just a little, which was strange because we never left that door open. Ever. My stomach lurched. I stood there, frozen, staring at the gap in the door. I wanted to go back to my room, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But instead, I convinced myself to check. Stupid, I know. I yanked the door open, heart racing. Nothing. Just coats and shoes. I laughed at myself, embarrassed for being so paranoid. But before I went to bed, I locked the closet door, just in case. A few nights later, something happened that I'll never forget. I woke up suddenly, not sure why. Then I heard it. Breathing. Slow, steady, and unmistakably close. I lay still, my whole body tense with fear. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway or outside. It was coming from inside my room. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I turned on the flashlight. I scanned the room. Empty. The closet was closed. I tried to breathe, to calm my racing heart, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. From then on, it only got worse. I felt like I was constantly being watched, like someone was just out of sight, lurking behind corners. I told my mom, but she dismissed it, chalking it up to teenage anxiety. Then, one day, she came home early from work, looking off. She woke me up, asking why the back door was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it the night before, but she insisted it was open when she arrived, and she had to go lock it herself. I didn't argue, but I knew something wasn't right. That night, I was on edge. I kept my bedroom door locked and my phone close. Around midnight, I woke up again, startled by the same feeling of being watched. It was heavier, deeper, like someone was standing right outside my door, waiting. My heart dropped. I lay still, barely daring to breathe. The closet door was open. Again. That was strange. I turned on the flashlight, hoping to calm myself by seeing that it was just my imagination. But the light flickered, and then it swung open another inch. That's when I saw him. A man, pale as a ghost, his skin stretched tight over his bones, greasy hair hanging in matted clumps, crouched in my closet, barely visible in the darkness. His face was twisted into a grin that made my stomach turn. He was so thin, so emaciated, like he hadn't eaten in weeks. And his eyes, they weren't just watching me. They were waiting. I don't even remember moving. 1 second I was staring at him. The next I was slamming my bedroom door shut, my breath coming in, panicked gasps. I bolted to Ryan's room, yanking him out of bed. He woke up crying, but I didn't have time to calm him down. I just grabbed him and ran, out of the house, straight into the night. My phone was already dialing 911. The police arrived within minutes. They found him, still crouched inside my closet, like he had been frozen in place, waiting. They said he'd been living in our crawl space for weeks, sneaking into the house at night while we slept. He'd been watching us, taking food when we weren't looking. But what chilled me to the bone was what they found when they pulled him out of the closet. It was a knife, tucked carefully behind my coats. The police said he had probably been waiting for the right moment. To do what exactly? I don't know. And I try not to think about it too much. But I can't help wondering, what if I hadn't woken up that night? This one is called The Creepy Bus Driver. This story happened to me in 2022, when I was around 24 years old. For some context, I am non-binary, assigned female at birth, but I look very, quote-unquote, feminine. At the time, I was studying in Paris and renting a room in my boyfriend's mother's house, located more than an hour away from the city, but only 20 minutes away from Versailles. It was winter, during a school break, and I was heading out to meet a long-time internet friend for the first time. She turned out to be a toxic and problematic person, but that's not the focus here. I must mention that I have a petite frame due to an eating disorder I've struggled with since childhood, and I've always looked much younger than my actual age. Even today, I need to show my ID to buy alcohol. On the day I met my friend, I wore a skirt, and our encounter went well. However, since I lived far away and planned to go to my boyfriend's house later, I had to leave before midnight. After 10 p.m., public transportation becomes infrequent, and I had around 2 hours of transit to reach my destination. Unfortunately, I didn't leave early enough. I managed to catch a train to Versailles, but had to wait almost an hour for a bus to take me to the nearest city to my boyfriend's house, where he would pick me up. While I waited near the train station, I noticed a group of bus drivers smoking and chatting. I approached them to ask which driver was heading to the city closest to my boyfriend's house. One of them, a small man with gray hair who appeared to be in his late 40s or early 50s, told me that it was his bus. He noticed my skirt and commented that I must be freezing, then offered to let me warm up inside the bus until departure. Grateful for the warmth, I accepted his offer. As he walked me to the bus, which was parked in a dark corner with no lights, he began to get too close and started asking personal questions about where I lived and where I was going. I felt uneasy but answered as briefly as possible, thinking it would be polite. Once we reached the bus, he opened the door for me, and though my instincts screamed to run, I ignored them and got on. I sat near the front, where there was a little light. I am black, and even in the dark, it would have been hard for anyone to see me, except for the other bus drivers who saw me leave with him. The second I stepped on, things took a turn for the worst. The driver threw his lit cigarette outside and came into the bus with me. He rambled on about the bus being designed to transport the French football team, and even a bathroom at the back, suggesting that I come with him to see it. The lack of light in the back of the bus terrified me, but I kept ignoring the fear and texted my boyfriend. Might not come home tonight. Weird bus driver. Call me ASAP. The driver lingered near the front of the bus, blocking the aisle. He kept talking about random things I couldn't even remember, his eyes fixated on me, especially my phone and my thighs. My stomach churned, and I prayed my boyfriend would see my message and call me, which he did. When the driver saw my phone screen, he took a step back and told me he was going to smoke another cigarette outside. I quickly answered my phone, telling my boyfriend everything, while keeping an eye on the driver through the window. When he was far enough away, I bolted for the door. But to my horror, it was locked. I was trapped. The only people who knew I was on that bus were the creepy driver and the other bus drivers who saw me leave with him. I kept talking to my boyfriend, my voice shaky as I explained my situation. Still on the phone with my boyfriend, I went back to where I was previously sitting and saw through the window that the creepy bus driver was coming back. When he saw me on the phone, he left and locked the bus again. He did this circus back and forth a total of 3 times, locking the bus behind him every time. But the last time he stayed near the bus, so I hung up with my boyfriend and decided to text him instead. At some point, I sat on another seat to keep an eye on the creepy bus driver. At one point, an elderly woman approached him, asking if the bus was heading to the city closest to my boyfriend's house. He deliberately lied, saying that another bus would come. My panic escalated, and I frantically texted my boyfriend, saying, "I'm going to die. The driver will do terrible things to me, then kill me and throw my body away." I could feel myself spiraling, but then something snapped in my head. I got up and lied to the driver, saying I needed to go back to the train station to use the bathroom. He insisted there was a bathroom on the bus, but I lied again, saying I needed snacks from the vending machine. He hesitated, but finally agreed to let me go. Before he opened the door, he pretended the button didn't work twice. At that point, I lost my composure and told him that if he didn't open the door, I'd use the emergency hammer to break it. Suddenly, the button worked. The door opened, and I ran out that bus faster than I've ever run in my life, inhaling the cold winter air like it was a breath of life. I hid behind a vending machine at the train station, shaking. After I calmed down, I called my boyfriend again, who told me he had contacted his sister and her boyfriend would come pick me up. But then, I saw him, the creepy bus driver. He was walking through the station, looking around, likely for me. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me, and finally, I saw him leave. That's when the full weight of the situation hit me. I was his prey, and I had been right about his intentions. When my boyfriend's sister's boyfriend arrived, I was taken to safety. I couldn't sleep that night, or the following nights. My insomnia only worsened. I made a complaint to the bus company, but since he wasn't a regular driver, they did nothing. I didn't even get a response. I am eternally grateful for everyone who helped me that night, and I'll say it again. For anyone who needs to hear it, trust your instincts. They are never wrong. And don't waste time being polite to creeps who make you feel uncomfortable or unsafe.